Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that we would like to hear from you. Please share your questions in the chat, and I will do my best to convey your comments to Cindy and Stephanie. And if I fail at it, I've got Nikki Harris on here to help me. If we don't get to your question, we'll do our best to respond by email after the meeting. 18 months ago or so, our world changed. And with our residents as our top priority, our whole team of 30 pivoted. And suddenly we were helping families access rent relief, put food on their table, overcome internet barriers, and battle isolation. It's been challenging, rewarding, and exhausting. But our hard work is paying off. To date, we've helped about 70% of the residents who were struggling to pay their rent access rent relief funds to the tune of $8.7 million and counting, as Susan said earlier. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears behind those statistics, but we're proud of those numbers. But we're mostly proud about the people that those numbers represent, who are stably housed and sleeping a little more comfortably tonight. We couldn't do what we do without your support, and we thank you sincerely. Now let's get started. Stephanie Bass and Cindy Razzone are managing our resident efforts and are here to take you behind the scenes on our pandemic response. Stephanie manages our outreach in Virginia, and Cindy manages our outreach in Maryland. First, as COVID changed our world, our residents were among the most vulnerable. Cindy and Stephanie will start off and tell us a little bit about the challenges and barriers that our residents faced as COVID took hold. Cindy, why don't you share with us some of the economic challenges our residents faced?
Thank you, Susan. Our residents, already financially and physically vulnerable, have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. To help, our entire resident services team immediately shifted to help our residents stay housed and keep food on their tables. Many of our residents faced daunting financial challenges. Service workers couldn't work from home, residents lost work or had to stop working due to personal or household members' health ailments. With fewer resources, rent became harder and harder to meet. Utilities were also a challenge, and many of our residents were fearful of utility shutoffs. Many of our residents faced food insecurity before the pandemic. COVID-19 highlighted residents' vulnerability, loss of income, more family members at home, including children unable to participate in school food programs, caused.
You're muted, Cindy.
Sorry, not sure how that would happen. About accessing adequate, nutritious food. Some residents were unable to or fearful about accessing public benefits like unemployment benefits and federal stimulus checks. There was also a huge challenge for many low-income working families to get a hold of technology barriers. Many of our residents didn't have access to Wi-Fi or devices to help manage the new distance learning or access information about possible health and financial help. There were also steep learning curves for residents who just didn't have the proficiency to access all of the intricate applications and processes that had now moved all online. Residents were also in great fear of contracting COVID-19. With most of our residents working in fields where they were required to interact with people, and this has continued to be a challenge throughout the pandemic.
Thank you, Cindy. Stephanie, in addition to economic challenges, our families face some emotional challenges. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Thank you, Susan. It was a difficult time for many of our residents, our families and individuals in our properties, as the loss of safety, routine, and increased social isolation had big impacts on emotional health and well-being. Some families worried about how they would pay their bills and get food on their table. But in addition to those economic stresses, folks didn't have access to a lot of the social coping mechanisms that help weather day-to-day stress, like participating in community activities or gathering with family and friends. Our senior residents were particularly vulnerable during this time. The emotional toll of the pandemic was something that weighed heavily on all of us.
Absolutely. At the same time, our residents were struggling, our staff was grappling with our own challenges. Stephanie, you started working with us in May, right after the pandemic hit. What are some of the challenges that you and the staff faced?
That's right, Susan. I was honored to start with AHC in May of 2020, towards the very beginning of the pandemic, and quickly realized some of the challenges of learning new things in a remote environment. Our whole resident services team had pivoted our service models and was learning new skills. Navigating the work in virtual meetings and phone calls was very different than being in person and learning by observation. Our communication patterns changed, and the whole staff had to adapt. Another big challenge that our staff faced initially was connecting with residents in need during the pandemic. We responded to the needs of our residents, and we expanded our services and our outreach work to our entire portfolio. And we realized that we really had to work to build a presence at some of our properties where we were, not previously providing services. So we did a lot of educating and explaining, who the resident services team is and what our role is. And that was a pretty big task to, build trust and relationships over the phone, without that grounding presence of a face-to-face connection. And in addition to those challenges, with new federal funding streams available for rental assistance and the kind of changing by the moment, there was a learning curve on all of the resources that were becoming available for our residents. We have properties in 5 different jurisdictions, so those programs were all administered in different ways and with different eligibility criteria. So we had to work hard to stay current and to adapt so that we could assist our residents in navigating those resources as the rules and the processes changed over time.
Absolutely. It was a very tough time. It was tough for our team, and they rose to the challenge, and they really brought our residents along. Stephanie, why don't you tell the group about some of the reasons the staff have been so effective and continue to be so?
Sure. Well, the first thing that we did in response to the pandemic was to connect with our partners in the community that were doing similar work around housing stability, so that we could collaborate on best practices and share information on resources. Working where people live, we are uniquely situated to quickly respond to the changing needs of our residents and deliver services in new ways. So after we realized how the pandemic would drastically impact our residents with waves of unemployment and decreased income to pay their bills, we pivoted our staff and we expanded capacity so that we would be able to help in a bigger way. We heard our residents' need for support and helped them to navigate the many complicated forms and processes to get access to assistance for rent and utilities. And, sometimes those processes were could take 2 hours. Sometimes they took 2 weeks to gather all the information necessary for our residents to get access to help. We also focused on food security efforts and health programs by capitalizing on our existing relationships with our essential partners, and we built new relationships. We quadrupled our on-site food distribution programs. We figured out how to get more fresh fruit and veggies to people at our properties. We provided masks, hand sanitizer, health information. We worked with our local partners to bring vaccination clinics on site at several of our properties. We offered virtual financial and career development workshops, which worked well for many of our residents as it eliminated barriers like the need for childcare or transportation, and allowed our residents to participate in those programs safely from home. Really, we just did whatever we could do to be a conduit to make sure our residents had the information and the resources that were available, and that they needed to stay afloat as best they could. We also had to learn to be flexible and jump in when new opportunities arose. For example, in Maryland, they have recently turned up the spigot on rental assistance. So Cindy's going to talk now a little bit about how her team in Maryland has jumped into action.
So the new year has provided an opportunity for us to continue to address the financial impact of COVID-19, specifically rental assistance, like Stephanie mentioned. Unfortunately, many of our families were looking longingly at all of the resources being distributed across states, specifically Virginia being a leader in rental assistance, and that took a little bit longer for the spigot to be turned on in Baltimore. In Baltimore, emergency rental assistance funds largely excluded individuals with rental subsidies, meaning ongoing systemic issues either ignored or maybe overlooked that COVID-19 universally impacted individuals, even those that hadn't lost their jobs or hadn't contracted the virus. In May, the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development created the Assisted Housing Relief Program. The program is limited to rental units and multifamily projects financed by DHCD's Community Development Administration using state or federal resources, such as low-income housing tax credits, where the unit rent is controlled. The program could assist residents with rent balances incurred in 2021, while property owners forgave 2020 balances. AHC immediately jumped on the opportunity and decided to forgive those balances, and the resident services team has been working diligently to work one-on-one with residents to complete the application. In just a month of working with residents, over $80,000 has been awarded, and we continue to work closely with our residents to help them get the same relief that they've been looking for this time.
Thank you, Cindy. This is just a quick snapshot of how our team pulled together, adapted, and continued to help our residents during this unprecedented time. But we're not out of the woods yet. The million-dollar question is what's coming up next. And I wish we had a crystal ball that we could pull out and tell you. But there are a few things that we see on the horizon in the coming months and in 2022. Stephanie and Cindy, if each of you would share, your thoughts about what our residents are going to be needing and our role in that in the coming months.
So this time has really invigorated our residents' desire to continue to work on their finances. We have had more residents participate in virtual financial literacy programs than we've had before, including so many of our seniors at Monteverde who have been knocking down our doors asking us about Bitcoin and how to invest. So it's been an exciting time for us to continue to work with our residents on managing their current finances. And then for many other residents who have taken the opportunity to embark on training programs and other educational opportunities so they can gain better employment opportunities.
And in Virginia, we will continue on in our rental assistance and outreach efforts. As long as funding is available here, we will continue to try to connect residents to those resources as they're eligible. We are trying to figure out our step forward and shifting out of an emergency response mode, but many of our residents are still in great need and in crisis. So, doing some assessment to see where folks are and what they might need. So we'll continue to support our residents as best we can. We'll refer them to needed resources in the community. And we will also expand our partnerships around workforce development and training so that residents can gain the skills that they need to stabilize their employment and income.
Thank you, Stephanie and Cindy. Well, as you can see, we have about 45 seconds. Lori, thank you for your comment. We really were proud to be able to hold together and do some virtual education last year, and so happy to have the children back in our programming and in our communities. And the kids are as excited as we are. So thank you, and thank you for your efforts there as well.